How the people are doing. So, human subjects. Now, the interesting thing here is this. When it comes to human subjects, I think that the Vivo, and I'm sure if you've seen any of my previous comparisons and so on and so forth, you also know for a fact that this phone, the X200 Ultra, is very capable with human subjects. It's quite something. It's consistent. Obviously, the software is really well optimized, but what sort of puts it forward as opposed to most of the devices is the fact that the hardware itself helps with human subjects. The 35mm main camera, that is. Because in regular photos, as we saw in just the previous comparison I made between these two, for normal photos, if you're interested in those, links in the description, check them out. Now, with regular photos, the 35mm mode can be cumbersome. It could cause framing problems. It's maybe too tight in a lot of cases. I actively face those problems in just the previous comparison, but with human subjects, the 35mm framing with optical zoom, you get all of the quality that you could possibly hope for, and it also looks very professional, very well framed. It just has no distortion. There's quite a few benefits, is what I'm trying to say. Now, how the Huawei will perform, well, that is entirely and completely a mystery to me, because I've never used Huawei devices before, and I don't really know how it's going to fare as opposed to Vivo. And honestly, I'm very excited to find out, so let's jump in. Now, we're kicking things off with the front cameras, because the rear cameras is where all the interesting stuff is at, and we'll get to it. So, with selfies in particular, I'd say it's very, very close on both. Honestly, the detail preservation, very nice, and the overall look and feel also appreciably good on both, but there are certain small differences. Now, in general, the Vivo is the one that tends to have slightly better balance in terms of contrast and exposure. Exposure in particular, because sometimes I just feel that the Huawei is a little overexposed and it looks a little flat as a result. Now, it's not a big difference. To be honest, we have much bigger fish to fry later on. However, another issue that I have noticed, and it is something we're going to see a lot of, is that the Huawei likes to add a lot of magenta in my skin tones, and the Vivo really enjoys the yellow in my skin tones. Again, these are not exactly permanent issues, because we just saw a lot of selfies that looked perfectly fine on both with just minor differences in exposure and contrast. But let's just say these are like repeat offenders that just surface enough times to annoy the hell out of you. Now, when it comes to dynamic range, one thing that I have noticed is that the Huawei, in terms of slightly backlit situations, it actually performs really well, and it's basically doing as well of a job as the X200 Ultra. However, pushing things even further, going for an even more directly backlit shot, well, now, the X200 Ultra, as you can probably guess, has a lot of HDR processing. You can see the HDR processing with the lens flare and everything else in there. The Huawei is struggling a lot more in this regard, because it's very obvious that yes, you can't really have the same amount of clarity on my face and on your subject without processing. And the Huawei is not really choosing to process. So that can be a bit of an issue. However, with Selfie Portraits, there's a whole different issue that we have to talk about. Yes, once again, you can see the slight hint of warmth on the X200 Ultra. It's not as bad as one of the selfies we saw previously, but the Huawei is magenta, very obvious, and definitely a little too much. Despite that, there's a much bigger issue at hand here. Look at the edge detection. Without question, it's way better on the Vivo. It's a night and day difference. And this is something that I've actually consistently noticed on the Huawei. The edge detection almost always just doesn't have the same amount of refinement. Comparatively speaking, it's very obvious, especially if you look at the hair, and sometimes my sunglass is not exactly cut out properly. Even my face, I can see issues with my ear and so on and so forth. There's definitely small minor issues that if you look hard enough, you're gonna notice those without question. Now, when it comes to the backlit selfie portrait, well, let's just say that this is actually faring a lot better than even the regular selfie, weirdly enough. Now, I don't mind how the Vivo looks. It's definitely processed. It has a lot of color in my skin tone, and it looks nice. Processed, but nice. The Huawei, on the other hand, it has a very stylish look to it. I wish it had just a little bit more juice in my skin tones, but this is, I guess, a really cinematic look that we're getting on the selfie here. Now, with night selfies, I'd say both are, oddly enough, just middle of the pack. I've definitely seen better night selfies from certain devices, but overall, this is not bad, but it's not the best either. because there's definitely a lot of noise and grain happening in the shadows, artifacts in there with noise reduction going on. And I do prefer the overall look of the skin tones on the X200 Ultra because there was a warm light falling on my face, and you can clearly see that, and it's much more natural in that regard on the Vivo. Now when it comes to night selfie portraits, I think the details take a significant hit in different ways, because on the X200 Ultra, it's like it's trying to sharpen and bring out details, and as a result there's a lot of artifacting on my face, the noise in my hair, there's a green tint happening just in the shadows, although that's not all that bad. The Huawei is taking a more smoothened out approach, which honestly I'm not a huge fan of either here. Now if you're wondering why I look like I'm sweating my bollocks off, well, it's because I was. And now of course, rear cameras. This is where things are going to be interesting because, well, we already saw quite a few differences in the selfies, but let's just say you haven't seen anything just yet. The obvious issue that I'm noticing immediately is that there's way too much magenta and the skin tones just look off. It's like the life has been drained out of my skin. For some reason on the Huawei, that's how it looks. The Vivo, on the other hand, yes, it looks a little bit warm. Weirdly enough, it looks like an iPhone shot that it's giving me deja vu for iPhone images, but well, there's definitely some warmth in there, but the scene also had a lot of warm light, so in a way it's natural. Now this one actually was more or less in daylight, and I think it's because of that the Huawei looks much nicer now. As opposed to the previous shot, as we saw, this is a significantly better image, and I definitely think that Huawei fares better in daylight as opposed to artificial lighting or indoors lighting. And I can sort of say that with confidence because it is faring really well, especially in this insanely backlit shot. I mean, the sun is just smacked up right there in the background, and both phones, as you would expect, are performing tremendously. If anything, the Huawei is the one that's pulling ahead because here I can very obviously see the processing and the haloing that's happening on the Vivo. But the Huawei's processing is very, very natural. The way it's doing it, it's about as perfect as you can get it to be. But then the moment we go indoors, instantly it's obvious that the Huawei skin tones just look off. There's something wrong with it. I think it's either overexposed or maybe undersaturated, or somehow the contrast is just not being balanced properly. There's something going on that doesn't look right. The Vivo looks a lot nicer. Once again, very much like an iPhone image. I don't know why I keep thinking it's like an iPhone image, but it is. And also, a lot warmer, which is natural, just so you know. We had really warm lights where I was indoors, so the warmth in the skin tones is very natural, and it is how it should naturally look. And of course, a very similar situation here as well. I'm telling you, there's just something off with the skin tones on the Huawei, whether it's magenta or the brightening or the way the contrast is not being balanced. It's lacking juice. That's the best single way of putting it. It's just the life is being drained out of my skin, and I don't appreciate that. The Vivo. See, in this case, I would finally say that yes, the warmth is maybe a little too much, and it's kind of lacking detail, and the texture of my skin looks very smoothened out, which not exactly the biggest fan of, but comparatively speaking again, the Vivo is doing a better job. Also, just check out the depth of field. This is not a portrait shot. This is a regular 3.7x zoom on both. And now we're finally getting to our portrait shots where the Huawei somehow just balances itself, because very obviously you can see that yes, it's stylized, yes, it has a bit of magenta tint, but it looks nice. It looks high contrast, it looks stylish, and I don't mind it, not in the slightest. Hell, I would even prefer it to what we're getting on the Vivo, which is nice and very natural, slightly on the warmer side, but I like the stylish look on the Huawei here. But for the most part, I do think that if you want more natural looking portraits, and especially indoors, well then you're gonna have much better luck with the Vivo. You can see physically just how much of the warmth is just being taken out of the image. That's not how it looked. The Vivo is doing a near perfect job here. The warmth is just right, it looks very natural, exactly how it looked. But honestly, with the inconsistency, this one included, with just the sheer amount of magenta happening on the Huawei. Yeah, I don't really see myself using this phone for any kind of portraits whatsoever, because after all, if human subjects are not consistent, that's a much bigger issue as opposed to just getting some good shots. And then we have this one, which, well, I don't even know the proper words. 4 shots were taken on the Huawei. Exact same results. I don't know what is going on there, but it's like the Huawei took offense to the fact that I said that it was removing warmth, and then basically gave all the warmth from all the images to this one particular one, which is just it's quite something. It's impressive. It's so bad it's gotten to the point of being impressive. Anyways, let us move on to the telephoto shots, and well, See, this one initially you might think yes, the X200 Ultra is comparatively doing a good job, but I don't really like that one either. But first, let's address the Huawei briefly. Its skin tones are just not good at all. Now the Vivo on the other hand, yes, it's better, but it's also not very nice because you have this weird smoothing effect on my skin. It's way too warm and greenish, which is not how anyone's skin looks, I think. Once again, in daylight, in the sun, sort of a similar situation going on. The Huawei definitely likes to take a higher contrast approach, and I think in daylight it sort of works out well enough to the point that you get slightly stylized images that look nice but not too over the top. The Vivo on the other hand takes a much safer, much more natural approach in general. Slightly warm on the skin tones for sure, without question. And if you're wondering what happens at 135mm, it is the exact same. If anything, the issues are much more exaggerated in case of the X200 Ultra. You can see the sheer amount of smoothing happening. There's some of it happening on the Pura as well. In case you're wondering, all beauty effects are turned off, obviously. But, well, we have issues to say the very least. I mean, case in point right here. Even in daylight, this is in daylight. Slightly backlit, yes. During sunset, yes. But still, even with the slightly higher amount of processing, which again you can kind of see in the shadows and whatnot on the Vivo, it's very obvious that it just looks like 100 times more natural as opposed to whatever is happening on the Huawei. Like, I'm telling you, it's lacking juice. But anyways, let us move on finally to night mode, because here things are a little bit more interesting. I think the skin tones actually look a little bit nicer on the Huawei. I don't know what's happening with the starburst effect. It's going way too overboard, like it's hopped up on crack or something. But other than that, the Huawei looks pretty nice. The Vivo, as expected, it looks really good. The skin tones are kind of oversaturated, but not in a bad way. In a way, it looks kind of neat. I don't really hate it, but I do like how the Huawei looks. Now with the night portrait on the other hand, I took a bit more of an interesting approach. Went for a backlit night mode shot. I mean, that's pushing the limits. If anything at all, it's pushing the limits. Let's just say both are suffering in their own ways. I kinda like the overall natural look of the Vivo. Yes, it's much darker on my face, but that's kind of the whole point. And I expected it to be way more processed, but somehow it's giving me a very natural result. The Huawei on the other hand, it definitely looks like it's brightening up my face a little too much. But honestly, I expected much worse results, which is absolutely not the case. Now lastly, of course, we have our telephoto shots. And yes, in this case, we actually had magenta and purple light falling on me, which is why both phones look like there's a lot of magenta in my skin tone. That's how it should be. And you can actually see one very interesting thing. The Vivo is still trying to add more green and yellow tones into my skin tones. Now of course, I also took a 135mm shot, which I would recommend that you don't really do because it's just not going to give you good results, especially at night. I mean, this looks like it's backlit, even though it wasn't. It wasn't supposed to be. Like, this is a very normal shot with some lights in the background, but somehow it looks very different. And well, the color tones on the Huawei, they explain everything by themselves. I don't even need to deal with that. And with that said, we're at the end of this comparison. I have to say, I feel like the Vivo fell off, sort of, because I very clearly remember the skin tones not having so many issues, especially with warming up skin tones. I don't know if any of the previous updates, they caused any such issues, but what I can tell you is that if Vivo had this much of a problem with warming up skin tones, then I'm guessing I would have remembered at the very least. But yeah, let's deal with the Huawei. The magenta in the skin, not good. The indoor skin tones somehow just don't work out. And it's just basically every single time I took an indoor shot, the skin tone was off. So it's like if you buy the Huawei for its cameras, in case you're willing to do that, I don't know. But if you are, well then basically forget about taking indoors portraits or selfies or anything of the sort, because it just doesn't look good. Especially with the rear cameras, I think it just doesn't look right. And that's the best way to really phrase it, because it's just, I don't really know what's going on there. Anyways, with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed and found this helpful. And also, I sincerely hope that Huawei at the very least can fix this, and Vivo, whatever the hell happened, I mean, lower the warmth on the skin tone. That's honestly the only real proper issue that we found. There's a little bit of smoothing, but I mean, both phones were doing that. Outside of that though, the warmth really needs to go on the Vivo. I'll see you guys soon enough with more. Cheers.